Welcome back to First Bite. We are back in our interview podcast series, coming to you live from the Pride of Detroit Twitch page, twitch.tv/Pride of Detroit. My name is Jeremy Reisman. I'm the producer over at Pride of Detroit. You can find me at Detroit Online on Twitter. With me, as always, co-hosting our First Bite interview show is our senior editor at Ryan_POD on Twitter. Ryan Matthews is here. How we doing, buddy?
The world's on fire.
How
Just
about
in time
yours?
for this podcast. Oh, hey, I'm sorry for that.
Set me up with a Smash Mouth. I gotta take it.
Oh man, it was so good.
Yes.
It was so good.
Now,
please segue Smash Mouth to Kent now.
No.
Do that.
Nope. Not at all. But hey, while the league is on fire with draft trades, we are going to talk about the draft and talk about last week's NFL Combine. We talked about it a little bit on the main POD cast, but we needed an expert here, the expert really for the NFL Combine, maybe the most in-demand guy that entire week, short of maybe Daniel Jeremiah. I think it's neck and neck, to be completely honest. But he is, first of all, a Pride of Detroit alum. He is the creator and developer of RAS, Relative Athletic Score, and he is now the NFL Analytics and Applications Development over at Pro Football Network. At MathBomb on Twitter, Kent Lee Platte is back. Kent, welcome back, buddy.
Always glad to be back, man. You guys are always a blast, and the Lions fandom is always so good to us. So let's kick it off, man.
Yeah. And in case people don't know who Kent is, which blows my mind if that's the case, he is a Detroit Lions fan too, so that makes him an especially unique person to have here on our podcast. Let's talk about RAS really quick. Again, just in case there are some people living under rocks that don't know what RAS is. Again, it stands for Relative Athletic Score. Give me like the elevator pitch of what RAS is and why it's caught on like wildfire.
Yeah, Relative Athletic Score is a composite metric that takes player athletic testing and puts it on a 0 to 10 scale. Anybody can understand a 0 to 10 scale. 0 is never going to be good on a 0 to 10 scale. So you know that 0 is bad, 10 is good, that 5 is right in the middle. Everything on the cards is stoplight color coded, red, yellow, and green. You always know that red is bad. That green is good, and you can figure out that yellow's in between. The idea behind this was to create a contextualized way of looking at player metrics so that fans can understand whether or not these guys are testing well. They can understand just by a glance if a player's 40-yard dash is good for his position group or not. A 4.55 might look very differently at defensive end than it does at wide receiver. A wide receiver running a 4.55 isn't that big of a deal. That's pretty average, but a defensive end running it, that's a pretty big deal. And an offensive lineman running it would be otherworldly. We haven't had it yet. Someday.
Probably.
But the reason it's caught on, I think, is just because of that. It's very simple. It's very easy to understand. The idea was to create something that was simple and easy to understand. And I think for the most part, I've succeeded in that front. People pick it up because it's easy.
Yeah, it's awesome, and it's cool to see how it's developed over the years and how it looks spiffier and spiffier every year with a nice fresh design upkeep. But the basic of it remains the same because it is so easy to understand, and I commend you for it. But let's get into it. Let's talk about the NFL Combine, and I think I want to format this as let's go through what I view to be as the Lions' top needs. And for those of you concerned listening at home that we're going to talk about quarterbacks the entire time, I've taken it out of the outline completely. You guys know Anthony Richardson was really, really fast. We don't need to talk about it. We've talked quarterback to death this week, to be frank. So we're going to start with cornerback. And let's start with maybe the biggest quote-unquote winner of the cornerback group in Christian Gonzalez, a guy who now is being very commonly mocked to the Lions at 6. Tell me about his performance, and then maybe to contextualize it, who's a guy that athletically he compares to that's in the NFL?
Yeah, he ended up with a 9.95 out of 10, which I think that's very, very good. He didn't test below average in any metric. He came in above average, above 90th percentile in his height, above 80th percentile in his weight, 95th percentile in his speed. He ran a 4.38, so he's a sub 4.4 guy. He had a 41.5-inch vertical and an 11-foot 1-inch broad jump. Both of those are 98th and 97th percentile respectively. Obviously, those are very good numbers, exactly what you're looking for. And that's just what you want. You want those kinds of testing numbers. The RAS cards actually have a comparison right beneath the cards now on every player page. It gives the top 5 comps that we could find. And I know Lions fans are really going to love the first comp that comes up for Christian Gonzalez. which is Jalen Ramsey.
Hmm.
His closest athletic comp being Jalen Ramsey probably raises a few eyebrows. They're both very similar in size. They both had a 14-inch vert. Their 40-yard dashes were very similar. They both had 41.5-inch vertical jumps. Their broad jumps were both over 11 feet. Ramsey did do agility testing and was above average there. Gonzalez skipped that at the combine and will probably do that in his pro day. So he tested very, very similar to a guy that I know a lot of Lions fans are clamoring for. So there's your athletic comp.
I love that. A couple of other winners, specifically one guy who I think really shot up draft boards and got on a lot of people's radar, including mine. Deontay Banks from Maryland. If you could talk about him a little bit, Kent, and let us know, is that somebody that you would feel comfortable with the Lions maybe taking at 18 if they don't take a cornerback at 6?
Yeah, he's got to be one of the biggest winners of the combine in terms of actually moving up, right? Because everybody kind of knew Christian Gonzalez was one of the top guys,
Yeah.
but they didn't really have that kind of view with Deontay Banks. He was moving up in boards, but I don't think he was consistently in the first round. I think he's going to be very firmly in the first round for a lot of folks now. Also ran extremely well. He ran a 4.35. He's got good size, very, very explosive dude. Very similar to what we were just talking about with Christian Gonzalez, just a little bit shorter. He's not short, he's just shorter than Christian Gonzalez is. Compares very favorably athletically to Byron Jones, Marshawn Lattimore, both of which were longtime starters in the league, and have had some pretty good success in the NFL. I think that you can absolutely take a player like that at 18, especially considering his tape kind of backs that up. A lot of people have been moving up him up boards before he even tested at the combine.
I like this. We've chosen a cornerback that compares to Jalen Ramsey from a Rams background, and now we've gone to Deontay Banks, who compares to Marshawn Lattimore, who obviously has a Dan Campbell / Aaron Glenn background. But let's say the Lions go in another direction. Maybe they get a defensive lineman early, and God forbid they go running back at 18. Who's a cornerback maybe on those day 2, day 3 guys that made an impression with you last week?
Yeah, you're probably not going to have a shot at Joey Porter Jr. in the second round. You may have a shot at Cam Smith. Cam Smith is another guy that tested really well. He just might get caught up in a numbers game. There's a lot of really good cornerbacks in this class, and the Lions are picking early enough in the second round. I think they're going to get a shot at one of those guys. Two names to keep an eye out for, though, are Julius Brents from Kansas State. Another really big cornerback. He's 6'2" and 3/4, almost 200 pounds, ran a 4.53. Great explosion drills, 98th and 99th percentile, respectively. Almost the best broad jump in history. He's never going to hit the best because Byron Jones is still a thing. But his agility drills were phenomenal. A 4.05 shuttle and a 6.63 cone, which at his height and his size is just bonkers. But he's a guy to look out for. Also, was already considered a day 2 guy and then tested like a day 2 guy. So you want to keep an eye out for him. Darius Rush from South Carolina is another guy you want to keep an eye on. Very, very fast. He ran a 4.36. Obviously, we just talked about Deontay Banks being a little bit faster at 4.35. But if there's anybody that plays faster than anybody else in this class at the cornerback position, it's Darius Rush, which makes sense because you got a name like Rush, you got to kind of back it up.
Right.
He didn't test very well in the explosiveness drills, and he didn't do the agility drills. You're going to see a lot of that from guys at the combine. A lot of guys skip out on that and then do it at their pro days. But he's a very good athlete and has a lot of promising tape to back it up as well.
I want to circle back real quick on cornerbacks. One other name that I think we need to talk about, specifically just because he didn't participate in the combine. He didn't participate at Illinois Pro Day. He's having his own workout on April 5th, I believe. That's Devin Witherspoon. What kind of numbers are you expecting from Witherspoon, and what kind of numbers does he need to have to kind of check that box, Ken?
Yeah, he's a very good athlete. And if he had tested, I would have expected him to be pretty close to Christian Gonzalez. I tend to think that Christian Gonzalez is a little bit better athlete than Devin Witherspoon is, but they're both phenomenal athletes. I would have expected them both to be very high in the nines in terms of testing. Gonzalez obviously was a 9.95. I would have expected Witherspoon somewhere in the low 9.9s, high 9.8s, which is like just barely behind that.
Right.
He's a very, very good athlete. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to test. He wasn't able to test his pro day either. He is having a personal pro day on April 5th, I believe. So I'm still hopeful that we'll get numbers for him before the draft.
Yeah, I guess the main difference between those two really just being the height then.
Yeah, that's really all that it's going to boil down to. I think he's going to run very well. I think he's going to test slightly behind Gonzalez, but he's so far on the extreme high end of testing anyway that it's not going to really change the numbers all that much.
All right, let's go to that other scenario I talked about. The Lions maybe going defensive line early, specifically defensive tackle remains a pretty large need for them. So Brisset is obviously maybe the best option outside of Jalen Carter, and who knows what's going to happen with Jalen Carter. We'll just kind of push him to the side of the conversation here, since he wasn't. I don't know if he wasn't able to do on-field drills or just decided not to, whatever it was. Brian Brisset out of Clemson and Kalijah Cansey are the two top names there. Obviously very different players, very different sizes of players. But which one do you, I guess, like fitting what Detroit wants to do?
Yeah, Detroit wants to be really physical, and both of those guys are really physical. They both are known for their first step. Cansey's first step is it's just obscene the way that guy can get off the snap. If he times your snap correctly, it's over. He's in the backfield, and it's very, very difficult to defend. He is an undersized Pitt defensive tackle. I know fans are going to love to hear this, but his closest athletic comp was Aaron Donald. So we can't do anything with it because he didn't do all the testing. So it's kind of stuck with, oh, it's going to be the next Aaron Donald. Probably not, but I mean that's where we're at right now.
Ken, you're saying he's probably not going to be the greatest defensive player of our generation? Darn.
Probably not. Maybe he will be. Maybe we're all overthinking it, and he really is that guy. I don't want to completely write him off. But maybe not. Who knows? But we have very little to go on outside of that in terms of testing. Bresci is all about his medicals, right? Because the guy's coming off a pretty bad knee injury, and teams wanted to see whether he was going to have any of that fluidity, whether he was going to still have that explosiveness. The idea that he is going to come back 100% and be able to play at the high level that he played in college was a pretty big concern. He doesn't really have the type of production that you want from a guy that high either, but he did look really good in terms of health when he was at the combine. He didn't look like that knee was bothering him at all. All of his medicals, as far as I've heard, have come back clean. And everything looks to be on the right track with him. So you have a very good player in both of those guys. For what the Lions like to do, I don't think you can really go wrong with either of them. I think there's a little bit less risk in Cansey than there is in Bresci. I'm always very conservative when it comes to injuries. But even taking that out of the equation, I just think you know more of what you're gonna get with Cansey. He translates to what you can figure out what you're gonna do with him just by watching him play. You know what you're gonna do. Bresci has a lot of really good stuff on his plate, a lot of good things that he can do, but he's gonna be a little bit tougher to fit in a specific role than I think you get with Cansey.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the most interesting discussions that's going to lead all the way up and through the draft of the Detroit Lions, just because, like you mentioned, Ken, in terms of fit, flexibility with what they want to do with their defensive tackles, you mentioned they want to be physical. They have I guess I'll call it the luxury of what they want to do with a Lee McNeil. He's shown an ability to be a nose tackle, but they seem to really like him at the three tech as well. So let's talk about some of the guys that you like at nose tackle. Um, maybe some guys who at the combine helped improve their stack.
Yeah, so there's two guys as far as nose tackles go that you really wanted to pay attention to that tested how they should have for nose tackles. I'm going to complain about one of them, but I want to preface it by saying that the only person who should have been like annoyed by how he tested or disappointed in his testing is just me. I'm the only one. No one else should be disappointed in his testing than just me.
Can I ask you a question real quick, Kent?
Yeah.
What is that metric that you're looking for from a nose tackle?
Nose tackles have to be big, they have to be explosive, and they have to have good length. But you don't really care about any of the timing drills. You don't really care whether they're fast or agile. Agility is a huge plus, and I'll get to that. But that's not a thing that you really care all that much for. You want them to be big, you want them to be strong, you want them to be explosive. That's 3 out of 10 testing metrics for RAS. So nose tackles tend to be a lot lower in terms of RAS, and both of these guys ended up below average. The first was Jared Clark, the defensive tackle from Coastal Carolina. great size. He didn't bench, but he did do well enough in the explosion drills that you're for his size where you're okay with it. He did really well in his shuttle drill, which is for a nose tackle is a very big plus. One of the big reasons that New England was as successful as they were with the big guys that they've used in the last couple of decades was getting big guys that could move laterally well. And that's something that Jared Clark tested very well in. So he tested for a nose tackle very, very well, just below average for Raz, but for a nose tackle, that's fine. You don't really care about that. I'm going to complain about Siaki Ika because he didn't test how I wanted him to. I love super athletic nose tackles. You guys know that. When we drafted Lee McNeil, I left work at Pro Football Network to come on your guys' pod and celebrate with you guys when we drafted Lee McNeil. I love really athletic nose tackles, and I expected Ika to be one of those guys. Unfortunately, he wasn't. As a nose tackle, though, the numbers are fine. His weight was really good. He also didn't bench. I expect him to do well there. He didn't do his broad jump, which is one of those numbers that you want. So he only really did the weight. So one of the 3 drills that he would have done well in, and then all of his testing drills. So his RAS ended up like 2.02, which is really, really low. His agility drill was just below average, which again for a nose tackle, that's very good for a nose tackle to be just barely below average for a defensive tackle. So his numbers ended up good for a nose tackle. You shouldn't be worried about that if you like him as a nose tackle. Me personally, I wanted him to be a little bit more.
Fair. One more guy before we take a break. I want to talk a little bit about Zach Pickens because he's kind of a unique guy. He's 6'4", but he's only 291. Tested pretty well, it looks like, athletically across the board. Where do you kind of view his best fit? Do you think the Lions can maybe fit him into their plan because he might be a guy that can kind of move up and down a little bit?
Lions like guys that are versatile on the line. They like guys that can move inside and out. They like to run that NASCAR package. They like to have that versatility when they have guys on their line. I don't know where he is from a value standpoint. I've been trying to pinpoint where exactly I would take him because I don't really view him so much as a day 2 guy. I kind of view him more as a day 3 guy. He did test really well though, so it might have moved him up far enough that they might consider him that highly. Whether or not that's fair, I don't have a good enough grasp on his play to be able to say that. But athletically, it's exactly what you want.
Yeah.